Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Read the Right Thing. I'm Eric. Hope you're doing well. I just got done finishing this book, Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of what I thought, what I disliked, liked, and then a few other things. A bank robbery, a hostage drama, a stairwell full of police officers on their way to storm an apartment. It was easy to get to this point, much easier than you might think. All it took was one single, really bad idea. This story is about a lot of things, but mostly about idiots. Fredrik Backman, he's a Swedish author. Several of Bachman's books have already graced the New York Times bestsellers list. And in my opinion, Fredrik Backman is one of the more interesting modern novelists. I put him up there with some of the modern authors who I'm most interested in. Fredrik Backman, Dennis Lehane, David Sedaris. Those are just a few that come to my head that when they put something out, it sparks my interest. Although I've only read two of his works. I've read Beartown and now I've read Anxious People. Backman's style utilizes multiple characters and plot lines. Backman seems to come up with these simple, brilliant narratives, but what makes him special and stand out is how he represents the human condition in these simple narratives. For example, Beartown is centered around a young girl who is raped by a star hockey player. But the story delves into much more into how society and people treat others and turn a blind eye to star athletes. And it really delves into how humans cope with trauma. The story is set in Sweden, but could have been set anywhere, really. Any country. It made me think a lot about America, especially like high school Texas football, and how sometimes in junior high, high school, star athletes are really put on a pedestal and they can do no wrong just because they're good at sports. It's also fun for me to read works from a contemporary author who is touted so much for his work. What he's writing is still growing, and I'm excited to see what he writes next, while also, still exploring his earlier work. It's kind of like discovering a band who's still making music. It's one thing to discover a band who their canon is set. There's going to be a finite amount of things you can listen to. But it's really enjoyable for me to discover musicians, artists, authors who are still working and still putting out great things. I like this quote from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that says, Fredrik Backman has a knack for weaving tales that are believable and fanciful. Backman's smooth storytelling infuses his characters with charm and wit. Now, this book, Anxious People, I would say, is more of a mix of fanciful and believable than Beartown. Beartown was gritty and cold, while Anxious People has almost this slapstick, charming humor to it. Even though it's about a person who robs a bank and commits a crime, it came across as very lighthearted to me. It came across as lighthearted while also dealing with deeper, darker topics. Some of the topics range on grief, anxiety, drug addiction, divorce, suicide, etc. So it is nice that the tone of the book is lighthearted when dealing with these heavy topics. Don't get me wrong, he's not making light of these topics. It's just, you don't get depressed when you're reading about them. And although it is fanciful at times, the story isn't totally unrealistic, just kind of parts of it. But woven through the fanciful characters and plot are stated truths about humanity. Things don't always go to plan. People hurt each other and hurt themselves. People are idiots, people are assholes, and the worst things can happen to people and they can happen to us. But on the contrary, people also help each other and they help themselves. People are empathetic, people are warm, people are caring, and people are all of these things at any given time. People probably span a lot of these things in just one single day. Like most Bachman novels I've heard, and like Beartown, Anxious People is similar in that the story, it takes a while to get going. The first 80 to 100 pages are really a lot of exposition. He's introducing characters, places, things, but in the end, I think with Backman, you're in good hands. Everything is written for a reason, and if you pay attention, you'll be rewarded in the end. Although the lengthy exposition will either drive you nuts or you'll enjoy it. With Beartown, I really enjoyed it. I had read some reviews and I knew what was coming, but I really enjoyed getting to know the town. However, with Anxious People, I started to question where it was going, but in the end, I'm glad I stuck it out. Also, before I get to the rest of my thoughts with Anxious People, please consider hitting that like or subscribe button. A quick synopsis. The plot has a lot of characters, and I'll try my best to do a quick synopsis. 8 people go into an open house for an apartment that's for sale. A recently retired couple who flips houses and are blind to their suffering marriage. a self absorbed, wealthy banker, a young lesbian couple who are expecting their first baby and are nowhere near ready, an 87-year-old woman, a real estate agent, and a weird man who was locked in the bathroom. These are the hostages. Then there are two police officers who interrogate the hostages after the fact and try to solve the crime. These two police officers are a father and son duo who bicker about everything. They have kind of a give and take, funny relationship. The son is kind of a hard ass, while the dad is kind of more carefree and jokey and just wants everybody to feel okay. The plot begins when the hostages are freed, but the bank robber vanishes into thin air. There is a gun on the floor and a blood stain on the carpet. The hostages are then questioned one by one. You bounce between the events of the hostage situation and the interrogations, and then also a few other things. The other plot lines follow the characters before the hostage situations, sometimes months, even years before. The characters, for the most part, are obnoxious, self absorbed assholes. But like I said, there's also these charming moments woven in between that make you keep reading. These characters are so over the top that you almost forget how obnoxious people can really be. You know, ourselves included. Maybe the characters are more realistic than I'm giving credit. In between the characters and story, there are these little drops of wisdom that are really great. They are written simply, yet powerfully. Like, even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. Or this: we all have this in common, yet most of us remain strangers. We never know what we do to each other, how your life is affected by mine. When this day is over and the night takes us, allow yourself a deep breath, because we made it through another day. A big theme from the book is how anxiety affects humans. We tend to overanalyze and devour every detail and decision we make in life. A few years ago, Fredrik Backman was looking for a new apartment in Stockholm when the inspiration to write this book hit. He says, "We'd seen maybe 9 apartments, and I was like, I'm good with all of them. I could live basically anywhere as long as my wife and kids are okay with it," Bachman said in a phone interview. "So I started looking at the people. Everyone in these places is insecure. Everyone is making a really big life decision. Everyone is standing there asking themselves a lot of questions. Where do I want to live? Is this the person I want to spend the rest of my life with? Are we going to have kids? Are the schools good here? Can we afford this?" And everybody feels a little bit invaded. This could be my home, and what are all these strangers doing here? Throughout this book, Bachman honestly breaks the fourth wall and he speaks right to the author. For example, he says this: "This is a story about a bank robbery, an apartment viewing, and a hostage drama. But even more, it's a story about idiots. But perhaps not only that." So he'll often refer to the reader and say, "You might do this, you might do that." So it was kind of interesting. It wasn't my favorite technique of his, but it didn't distract me enough to make me put it down. So let's get to my dislikes. Like I said, a few of my dislikes were the exposition, the setting up of the characters. I didn't enjoy the exposition as much as Beartown, but that's okay. I think it's just because I wasn't as into the story and into the characters as much as Beartown. Also, his choice to refer to the reader directly and say, "You might have done this, you may have gone through this, you might be thinking this." It was kind of an interesting choice. It wasn't too distracting, but I didn't particularly enjoy that part. But overall, this book, Anxious People, it was the right thing for me. I would say check it out. Fredrik Backman is an interesting current author who is still putting out work, and it's kind of fun to keep along with what he writes. And I think he's kind of a guy where either you enjoy his writing or you don't. And Beartown was even made into an HBO show, so that's kind of cool. I started to watch it, but the show, it couldn't hold a candle to the book, really. The book is way better. I think the show, it achieved the overall tone of the book, but too many characters were just left undeveloped in the TV series, which tends to happen. You can only develop so much. But thanks for tuning in. That was my review of Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. Have you read this book? If so, let me know what you thought in the comments. Please hit that like button and hit the subscribe button. I post videos pretty often. I would really appreciate it. So thanks for tuning in. That was my review of Anxious People. Have a good one.